Your Bible opens the most famous sermon on earth with the word blessed. The Greek word underneath it is makarios. And makarios was not a religious word at all. We call it the Sermon on the Mount. 3 chapters in the Gospel of Matthew, first spoken aloud on a hillside in Galilee, and it carries a reputation, the highest bar anyone ever set. A teaching people call beautiful and impossible in the same breath. But that reputation was built in English. Not one line of this sermon was first written in English. You have read a translation, sometimes shaped by another translation, and called that the sermon. Every word we are about to examine, you can check for yourself tonight. So before anyone decides what this sermon demands, we should find out what it actually says. One word at a time, in the language it was born in. Because by the end, you are going to reach a single word in the most famous prayer on earth that no translator can define with certainty. Start with that first word, makarios. In ordinary Greek, long before the Gospels, makarios described the gods. It described the blessed dead. It was the word for a life so full and so secure that nothing outside it could reach in and spoil it, beyond worry, beyond the reach of fortune and loss. Not happy because things happen to go well, untouchable. Some newer Bibles even swap in the word happy, which shrinks it to a mood, a good afternoon. By the 1st century, the word had softened in everyday speech, closer to fortunate. But the older weight still echoes here, because nothing about the people he is describing looks fortunate. That is the shock of it. Makarios is not a mood, it is a standing that the day cannot touch. The Greeks even spoke of far-off islands where the blessed dead were said to rest, the Isles of the Macaron. This was that word. And he does not say it once. He says it 9 times, one line after another. Makarios, 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 a drum beat down the whole opening of the sermon. Every English Bible turns that beat into blessed, 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 and somewhere in the repetition we stopped hearing, it was the word once reserved for the untouchable gods. Now read the line again. Makarios are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Not theirs will be, theirs is. Present tense. This is not a reward being dangled in front of good behavior. It is a description of a condition that already holds. And who is he describing? The poor in spirit. The Greek there is tokos. Greek had a gentler word for the working poor, penes, the man who has little and works for the rest. This is not that word. Tokos is the beggar, crouched down with nothing, fully emptied, his hands still out, dependent on what another person gives. 2 different people, 2 different Greek words, and English flattens both into poor. The sermon reaches for the stronger word on purpose. It does not open by asking you to become modestly humble. It pronounces the completely empty already safe. Poor in spirit is that emptiness turned inward, the person who knows he is spiritually bankrupt and still holds out an open hand. He is the tax collector in the later story who could not even lift his eyes. That is the person the sermon names Makarios first. 3 lines down comes another word everyone thinks they understand. Blessed are the meek. Meek sounds like weak. It is not. The Greek is praus, and Greek writers could use it for a horse gentled to the bridle. Every ounce of its strength remains. The horse simply answers the reins. The word could also describe soothing medicine or a gentle breeze, strength that settles a thing rather than crushing it. Power under control. Not a mouse, a stallion under the hand that has lost none of its force. That is 3 words in, and none of them has asked you to do anything. They are not commands. They describe people the sermon already calls blessed. Gentleness here is not the absence of force. It is force that no longer needs to prove itself. Keep walking. You are the salt of the earth, Jesus says, but if the salt loses its savor. The Greek verb there is moranthe. In ordinary use, it could mean to go tasteless, which is why your Bible reads the way it does. But it is built on moros, the word we get moron from, and the pun is sitting right there in the sentence. Salt that loses its savor is salt that has gone foolish. The English keeps the scolding and quietly drops the joke, and the word the prayer still cannot settle is waiting further down the hill. Then the line people use to make this sermon heavy. Do not think I came to abolish the law. Abolish is katalio, to loosen down, to pull a building to the ground. He sets it against pleru, to fill something completely full. He is not the wrecking crew. He is the one filling the house to the rafters. The English word fulfill has gone flat and legal. The Greek is overflowing. And then comes the pattern people find hardest of all. You have heard that it was said, he keeps repeating, but I say to you. In Greek, that turn is ego delego. That is not how a rabbi normally built a case. A teacher appealed to the authorities before him. Rabbi this taught. Rabbi that taught. Jesus cites no one. He says, I. He is claiming the standing to read the text on his own authority. The first time he uses the turn, he warns against calling your brother a fool. The Greek word is more, from moros, the same root as the salt that went foolish. He is not merely stacking harder rules on older ones. He is pressing toward what those words were pointing at all along. And here is one that has frightened people for centuries. He warns of being thrown into hell. The word is Gehenna. Before it became a theological word in English, Gehenna was a place name, the Valley of Hinnom outside Jerusalem. Generations before, children had been given to the flames there, and Jeremiah recorded God's answer. I never commanded it, and it never entered my heart. The prophet renamed it the Valley of Slaughter. That memory clung to the name. When Jesus says Gehenna, the people on that hill know the ravine he means. Whatever later theology built around the word, it first carried an address and a history. And then the summit, the line that gives the whole sermon its reputation. Be perfect, as your heavenly Father is perfect. Perfect is teleos. Its primary force here is not flawlessness, but completeness, finished, brought to full purpose. Greek could use it for a grown adult as opposed to a child. A child is not broken for being a child. A child is simply not yet complete. That distance between not yet grown and grown is the difference between teleos and flawless. The word marks maturity, not moral machinery that never misfires. Set it beside the verse above, where God sends rain on the righteous and the unrighteous alike, and the line describes completeness of reach, a love that leaves no one out. Hold that word. Be teleos. We are going to return to it because another gospel preserved the same teaching and did not use the word perfect at all. And these are only the words we have time to stop on. The lines you know best move the same way. Turn the other cheek. Take no thought for tomorrow. Consider the lilies of the field. Each has a word underneath it that English can make heavier, colder, or stranger than the line itself. There is still more beneath the language you already know. If this is the first time you have heard the sermon opened one word at a time, subscribe and read the next passage with me. Chapter 6 is where the sermon is supposed to turn crushing. Watch what happens when the words come back into focus. It opens by warning against the hypocrites. We use that word as a pure insult now, a fake, a fraud. In Greek, hypocrites originally named a stage actor, the person in a mask speaking toward an audience. One actor could play several parts by lifting a different mask for each one. The word becomes an accusation when it is used for a person at prayer. Jesus is not describing secret wickedness. He's exposing a public performance before God that needs to be seen. So instead he says, go into your closet and pray. Closet sounds quaint. A little wooden cupboard. The Greek is tamion, the innermost storeroom of a house, the windowless inner room where a family kept what it valued. Not a prayer nook, the one room in the house with no audience at all. The point was never the furniture. The point is that there is nobody there to perform for. And then he gives them the prayer, the one you know by heart. Forgive us our debts, it says, as we forgive our debtors. Debts is ophelema, a hard financial and legal word, a debt, a sum owed, not a vague trespass or a soft general sin, something concrete enough to enter in a ledger and cancel with a line. Luke's version begins with sins, then returns to everyone indebted to us. Matthew keeps the ledger visible from beginning to end. Lead us not into temptation. Temptation is perasmos, a word that can name a test or trial, the way raw metal is tried in fire. It is more than the whisper that entices you to do wrong. It is being put to the proof. No one can serve two masters, he says. You cannot serve God and mammon. Mammon is not even Greek. It is an Aramaic word left sitting untranslated in the text, mammonas, wealth treated as a rival lord, money that has climbed onto a throne. The translators left it as it was because it names a master, not a sum. Now notice what has happened. Every single word in the most repeated prayer in the world has an ordinary, concrete, readable meaning sitting under the English. Every word but one. There is a word in the middle of that prayer that we have said every day for 2,000 years and still cannot translate. We are going to end there. The last stretch of the sermon holds the line people quote most and understand least. Judge not, that you be not judged. Judge is krino. It can mean to separate or sort, and then to hand down a decision. The word can include discernment, but the warning here presses toward verdict and consequence. Jesus is not forbidding you from seeing clearly. He is warning against climbing onto the bench and passing the verdict. Noticing is not the target. Sentencing is. For with the measure you use, he says, it will be measured back to you. That is not only a threat, it is a mirror. Whatever bench you climb onto, you eventually stand in the dock of it. And a few breaths later, the same sermon tells you to watch the fruit of false prophets, which is nothing if not a kind of judging. In English, the two lines look like they are fighting each other. In the Greek, they never were. One is sorting fruit, the other is passing sentence on a soul. He drives it home with a joke the English kills. You stare at the speck in your brother's eye and miss the plank in your own. Speck is karphos, a tiny dry wood chip. Plank is dokos, a load-bearing roof beam, the great timber that holds up a house. The picture is absurd on purpose. A man with a rafter sticking out of his own eye, squinting in to help you with a splinter. That crowd laughed. We turned it into a stern lecture. Then, near the end, comes the narrow gate. Enter by the narrow gate, for the way is narrow that leads to life, and few find it. Narrow can sound like a nearly shut door, a tiny quota, almost everyone locked out. But the Greek words are stenos and tethlimene, from thlebo, to press, compress, or squeeze under pressure. The second word shifts attention from exclusivity to pressure. This is not only a narrow doorway, it is a constricted road, more like a mountain pass. The image asks not merely how many enter, but what the road costs to walk. And the line that has haunted so many, I never knew you. It sits right here in this chapter, and new is ginosko, the word for knowing a person closely by experience, the way you know a friend and not the way you know a fact. He is not saying I never had your file. He is speaking the language of relationship, not of records. And then the sermon ends, and Matthew tells us how it landed. The crowds were astonished. The Greek is ekplesso, and it is almost a violent word. It means struck out of yourself, knocked clean from your senses, driven out of where you were standing. They were not politely impressed, they were staggered. Because, Matthew says, he taught them as one having authority. Authority is exousia, not dynamis, not raw force. Exousia is the right to act, the warrant, the standing to say a thing and have it hold. And still, all these centuries later, we handed the whole thing to the English. We have walked one whole sermon, 3 chapters, and barely slowed down. Each of these lines could hold us for an entire video, but this was the map. And now we are standing over the one word. The prayer still will not let us translate with certainty. Here is the word. Give us this day our daily bread. The word translated daily is epiousios, and epiousios appears nowhere else in the New Testament. It is absent from the classical plays, letters, shopping lists, tax records, and the vast surviving body of Greek outside this prayer. Its one early Christian echo is in the Didache, and the Didache is quoting the prayer itself. That is the trail. Daily is a guess, a careful and ancient guess, but still a guess. Origen, one of the great Greek minds of the early church, wrote in the 3rd century that he could find the word in no other Greek author and believed the gospel writers had coined it. Translators still disagree. Some render it daily, some the bread for tomorrow, others the bread necessary for existence. Every time you have asked for daily bread, you have prayed a word that even the finest scholars can interpret only from its setting, its form, and the prayer surrounding it. The problem is not that the word means nothing. The problem is that several meanings fit, and no second independent use survives to settle between them. Say that prayer with the hundreds of millions who repeat it every day, and together you are carrying a word no one alive can define with certainty. And then came Jerome, the man who gave the Western Church its Bible in Latin. He met epiousios in both places it survives, in Matthew and in Luke, and he did not force it into one answer. In Matthew, he rendered it supersubstantialum, supersubstantial, a new Latin word built because no ordinary one seemed to carry the weight. In Luke, The same Greek word in the same prayer became quotidianum, daily, one word, two Latin answers. The translator, who shaped how the West would read the Bible, preserved the uncertainty instead of pretending it was gone. So the claim we started with was not merely a figure of speech. One word in this sermon remains unread with certainty, not because Greek is inaccessible, and not because translators failed, but because this Greek word left almost no surviving trail outside the prayer itself. He did what honest translation sometimes requires. He let the difficulty remain visible inside the translation itself. And that unread word throws its light back across everything behind it. Remember the summit. Be teleos. Be perfect. Luke preserves the parallel teaching with a different word. Be merciful, as your Father is merciful. Put the two witnesses together, and the demand for flawlessness begins to loosen. Matthew says complete, Luke says merciful. That is what the whole sermon has been doing. Makarios does not reduce blessing to a good day. Tokos does not flatter modest humility. Praus does not praise weakness. Teleos does not demand a flawless record. The Sermon on the Mount is still demanding, but the demand is no longer to become impossible. It is to become whole, empty enough to receive, strong enough to be governed, complete enough to let mercy reach as far as the rain. What looked like a ladder beyond reach begins to look like a life growing into the mercy already described. The text has not become smaller. It has become readable. The sermon still asks everything of you, but it no longer asks you to become something no human being could ever be. And the fear was never the point. There is one more thing about that prayer. The ending many Christians recite, the part beginning for thine is the kingdom, is absent from the oldest copies of Matthew. They stop at deliver us from evil. The closing line entered the manuscript tradition, later through the worship of the church, then became familiar through centuries of prayer. I trace that history in the video on the screen now. If one uncertain word could remain in the middle of this prayer, the story of what happened at its ending is worth reading next.